Journey to the Centre of the Earth. My name is Axel, and I live with my uncle, Professor Otto Lidenbrock, in Hamburg, Germany. My uncle is a famous scientist who studies rocks and minerals. He is tall, thin, and full of energy. When he speaks, his eyes shine like fire. I help him in his work, and sometimes he forgets that I am his nephew, not his assistant. One afternoon, my uncle came home holding an old book. He looked very excited. "Axel!" he shouted. "This is a rare book, written in Icelandic by a famous explorer named Snorri Sturluson." He opened the book carefully, and suddenly a piece of old paper fell out. It was yellow and dry. Strange letters were written on it in an ancient language. My uncle looked at it and became even more excited. "This is runic writing," he said. "It is from the 12th century. He tried to read it, but the letters made no sense. He worked for hours, turning the paper in every direction, but he could not understand it. Finally, tired and angry, he threw it on the table and left the room. I picked up the paper and looked at it. The writing was indeed strange. Then I noticed something. Some letters repeated in a pattern. I thought it might be a secret code. After a while, I realized the message might be written backward. I turned the paper around and read, "Descend into the crater of Snæfellsjökull, which the shadow of Scartaris touches before the calends of July, and you will reach the centre of the earth. Arne Saknussemm." I could hardly believe what I had found. Arne Saknussemm was a famous Icelandic scientist from the 16th century. The message said that he had gone to the centre of the earth through a volcano in Iceland. At that moment, my uncle came back. When I showed him the message, he jumped with joy. "Axel, this is wonderful! Arne Saknussemm found the way to the centre of the earth, and we will follow him." I was shocked. "Uncle, you can't be serious. It's impossible. Nobody can go inside the earth. The heat, the pressure—" "Nonsense," he cried. "Science must be brave. We will go to Iceland, find the volcano Snæfells, and make the journey ourselves." I tried to argue, but he would not listen. When Professor Lidenbrock decided something, nothing could stop him. Within 2 days, he packed his scientific instruments, maps, ropes, and food. I had no choice but to go with him. Our trip began the next morning. We travelled by train to Copenhagen, then by ship to Iceland. The sea was rough and I felt sick most of the time. My uncle, however, stood on the deck, watching the horizon and taking notes. Finally, after many days, we arrived in Reykjavik, the capital of Iceland. It was a small town surrounded by dark mountains and strange clouds of steam rising from the ground. My uncle was delighted. "This country is full of volcanoes," he said. "Exactly what we need." There we met Hans Bielke, a tall, calm Icelander who worked as a guide. He spoke little but was strong and reliable. My uncle hired him immediately. After a few days of preparation, we began our journey toward the volcano Sneffels. It was a long walk across wild landscapes of black lava, green moss and icy rivers. Sometimes we saw steam rising from the ground and smelled sulphur in the air. The nights were cold, but the northern sky was full of stars, and I often forgot my fear as I watched their beauty. After 10 days we reached Sneffelsjökull, a giant, silent mountain covered with snow. Its top was broken into 2 peaks. Between them was a dark crater that looked like the mouth of the world. My uncle looked at it with shining eyes. "This is it, Axel. The gate to the center of the earth." We stood at the foot of Sneffelsjökull, looking up at its 2 snowy peaks. Cold wind blew from the mountain, and clouds moved quickly across the grey sky. My uncle, Professor Lidenbrock, was full of excitement. I was full of fear. At the small village near the mountain, we rested for 1 night. The people there spoke softly about Sneffels. They said strange lights sometimes shone from the crater, and no one dared to climb it. But my uncle only smiled. "Superstition," he said. "Tomorrow we begin our descent." Early the next morning we started to climb. Hans led the way, walking calmly over rocks and snow. My uncle followed, full of energy, while I struggled behind them, breathless and tired. After hours of climbing, we reached the edge of the crater. When I looked down, I saw a dark hole that seemed endless. Clouds of mist rose from it, and the smell of sulphur filled the air. We made camp on the edge. The professor opened his notebook. "According to Arne Saknessum's message," he said, "the entrance to the centre of the earth will appear when the shadow of the mountain Scartaris touches this crater. That happens before July." We waited for 2 days. On the 3rd morning, as the sun rose, the shadow of Scartaris slowly moved across the crater. "There!" my uncle shouted. "Look, it points to the western tunnel." He was right. The shadow touched the mouth of one of several dark tunnels leading deep into the mountain. Without hesitation, he began to prepare for descent. Hans tied the ropes and checked our tools: lamps, thermometers, compasses, and food supplies. I looked down into the darkness and felt cold fear in my heart. At last we began. Hans went first, then my uncle, then me. We climbed down step by step, holding the ropes and lighting our lamps. The rocks were wet, and drops of water fell from above. The echo of our footsteps sounded strange and hollow. Soon the light of the day disappeared, and we were surrounded by total darkness. Only our lamps gave a faint yellow glow. After several hours, we reached a small cave where we could rest. My uncle looked at his instruments. "We are now 2,000 feet below the surface," he said proudly. "Excellent progress." I was not so enthusiastic. The air was hot and heavy. My back hurt and my throat was dry. "Uncle," I said, "this is madness. We can still return." "Nonsense," he replied. "We have only begun our adventure." The next day we continued through narrow tunnels. Some were steep, others horizontal. Sometimes we had to crawl on our hands and knees. The heat increased as we went deeper. Water dripped from the ceiling, forming small streams that ran under our feet. We filled our flasks, but the water tasted bitter and metallic. After 2 more days, we came to a place where the tunnel divided into 3 passages. My uncle studied his compass. "According to the message," he said, "we must go down the one that leads to the west." We entered the western passage. It went down sharply, like a long staircase into the heart of the earth. Our lamps flickered in the hot air. I counted our steps, hundreds, then thousands. My legs trembled. At last we stopped in a large cavern. Here we rested again. The professor took out his thermometer. 40 degrees Celsius, he said calmly. Still bearable. I wanted to say something, but suddenly I felt a drop of water on my face. Then another. Soon a heavy rain of warm water fell from above. The lamps went out. We were in complete darkness. My uncle shouted, "Hans, protect the instruments!" We crouched down, waiting. The water stopped after a few minutes, but our clothes were soaked. We relit the lamps. The tunnel had changed. Parts of the ceiling had fallen, and new cracks opened in the wall. "A small volcanic reaction," my uncle said, smiling as if it were nothing. I was terrified. We continued for many more hours. Sometimes the tunnel went upward, sometimes downward again. The rocks around us changed colour, from black basalt to red and yellow minerals that glowed in the lamplight. The air smelled of metal and salt. Time lost its meaning. We no longer knew if it was day or night. At one point, Hans stopped and pointed to the ground. There was a hole. When he threw a stone into it, we waited. 1 second, 2, 3, then a distant splash. "Water," he said simply. My uncle's eyes lit up. "A subterranean sea! Perhaps we are near it." but I was exhausted. My legs ached and my heart was full of fear. "Uncle, please," I begged, "let us go back. We'll die down here." He looked at me kindly for the first time. "Axel, you are young and afraid. But remember, great discoveries require courage. Tomorrow we continue." That night I could not sleep. I thought about the weight of the earth above us. Mountains, oceans, cities, pressing down. What if the tunnel collapsed? What if we lost our way? In the darkness I heard strange echoes, like whispers in the stone. Perhaps it was only my imagination, but I felt that we were not alone. The next morning we packed our things and moved on. The tunnel grew wider and smoother, as if shaped by ancient water. Suddenly a strong wind blew from ahead, and the lamps almost went out. "There must be a large open space ahead," said my uncle. He was right. After a few more steps, the tunnel opened into a vast cavern. Our lamps could not reach the far walls. The air was cooler, and I heard the soft sound of waves. "We have reached a great underground lake," my uncle cried, "just as I imagined." I stood silent, amazed. The surface of the water shone faintly in the light of our lamps. Above us the ceiling was lost in darkness. It was like another world, silent, endless, and full of mystery. We stood on the edge of the enormous underground lake, unable to speak. The water spread into the distance like a sea. Strange white fog floated above it, and from the dark ceiling came a soft light, like a pale sunrise. It was impossible to tell where the light came from, but it allowed us to see everything around us: rocks, sand, and even small plants growing near the shore. "It is beautiful," I whispered. "It is magnificent," said my uncle. "This is proof that the earth has great empty spaces inside. There is air, water, and maybe even life." Hans listened silently, standing with his calm expression. He had already begun to make a small raft from pieces of wood and ropes. My uncle smiled. "Excellent. We shall cross the lake." When I heard this, I felt both excited and afraid. The lake was endless. The far side was hidden by mist. What if there were storms or monsters in that water? But my uncle was full of joy and energy. "We must explore," he said. "We may discover a new world." It took us 2 days to prepare the raft. We made it from logs tied tightly with ropes and covered the bottom with tar from the rocks to make it waterproof. We also packed our food, scientific instruments, and lamps. When everything was ready, we pushed the raft into the water. It floated perfectly. On the morning of the 3rd day, we started our voyage across the underground sea. Hans used a long pole to push the raft from the shore. The water was calm and shining. Soon we were far from land, surrounded only by silence and fog. At first, the journey was peaceful. The air was cool and full of moisture. Sometimes small winds moved across the water, and tiny waves rocked our raft. My uncle sat at the front, taking notes and measuring temperature and air pressure. I looked into the water. It was dark, but sometimes strange lights flashed below, blue and green sparks moving slowly like living fire. "What is that?" I asked. "Perhaps phosphorus," said my uncle. "Or maybe some kind of animal. Who knows what life exists down here?" We sailed for many hours. Once we stopped to eat bread and dried meat. We drank from a small barrel of water, though it had a metallic taste. Then we continued. Hans hardly spoke, but his calm presence gave me courage. The next day we noticed something strange. The magnetic needle of our compass moved wildly. "The metal in these rocks must disturb it," said my uncle. "We cannot trust our direction anymore." That made me uneasy. We were travelling blindly into a world no one had ever seen. As we sailed on, the light in the cavern began to change. It became stronger, golden, almost like daylight. I looked up and saw that the ceiling was covered with shining crystals that reflected our lamps. The air was warmer again. Then Hans suddenly pointed to the water. A huge dark shape moved beneath us. It passed slowly, like a shadow. I felt my heart stop. Another shape followed it, larger, with a long tail. "Uncle!" I cried. "Something is down there!" He stood up and looked. For a moment nothing happened. Then not far from us the water broke open, and a giant creature rose to the surface. It looked like a reptile, with a long neck and teeth like knives. Behind it another monster appeared, with a flat body and fins like wings. The two creatures swam toward each other and began to fight, striking the water with their tails and roaring. Waves rose high, shaking our raft. "Plesiosaurus! Ichthyosaurus!" shouted my uncle, his eyes full of amazement. "Prehistoric animals. They still live here." But I was terrified. "They'll destroy us." "Hold on!" my uncle cried. The battle between the monsters was terrible. The water boiled around them. They bit and struck each other, and pieces of flesh flew into the air. Hans held the raft steady with his pole. For several minutes the creatures fought furiously. Then finally, the larger one disappeared into the depths, dragging the other with it. The water slowly became calm again. I sat down, shaking. "Are we still alive?" I whispered. Yes, said my uncle, and we have seen what no man has ever seen. Remember this moment, Axel. For a long time we drifted in silence. I looked into the dark water and imagined other strange creatures watching us from below. The air smelled of salt and electricity. Then far ahead, a soft light appeared, a glowing line like lightning. Soon the wind began to rise. Small waves turned into large ones. The air grew hot, and I heard thunder. "A storm!" shouted my uncle. In seconds the peaceful sea became wild. Wind tore at our clothes and rain fell in heavy drops. Our lamps went out. Lightning flashed across the cavern, showing the black waves and high walls around us. Hans held the raft with all his strength. We tried to steer, but the wind pushed us wherever it wanted. Then a terrible crash shook the air. A wave lifted our raft high, then dropped it again. I fell and hit my head. For a moment everything went dark. When I woke up, I was lying on the sand. The storm had passed. My clothes were dry, as if many hours had gone by. My uncle sat nearby, reading his instruments. Hans was fixing the raft. "Are you hurt?" my uncle asked. "No," I said weakly. "Where are we?" He smiled. "That's the question. The storm must have blown us far from our course. We may be on a new shore, maybe even under another country." We stood up and looked around. The cavern here was huge, with high rocky walls and strange plants growing near the water. Some looked like giant ferns, others like trees without leaves. The air was warm and heavy, and I could hear distant sounds. Maybe the cry of some unknown creature. "We shall explore," said my uncle, taking his compass. "We are still on the path to the centre of the earth." We walked inland, amazed by what we saw. There were tall mushrooms like umbrellas 10 feet high. There were insects with wings as large as my hand. Once, I thought I saw a small lizard walking on 2 legs, but when I looked again, it was gone. "This world," said my uncle softly, "is like the ancient earth, a place from before humans existed." I nodded silently. Around us was a prehistoric forest, full of silence and mystery. Above, the crystals on the ceiling shone like distant stars. I felt small and humble, as if we had travelled not only through space, but also through time. We continued our exploration of the strange underground world. The air was thick and warm, filled with the smell of plants and minerals. Above us, the glowing crystals gave light like a pale sun. The forest stretched as far as we could see, silent, ancient, untouched by time. My uncle walked ahead, excited by every discovery. "Axel," he said, "this world shows us the earth as it was millions of years ago. Look, these plants are from the age of the dinosaurs." We walked between giant ferns and tree-sized mushrooms. Our footsteps echoed softly on the wet ground. Sometimes we heard strange animal cries, deep and far away. Once, Hans pointed to large footprints in the mud. They looked like those of an elephant, but larger, rounder. "Perhaps there are living prehistoric animals here," my uncle whispered. "We must be careful." After some hours, we came to a wide clearing where a river ran quietly through the forest. Its water was clear and cool. We drank and filled our flasks. Then, suddenly, we heard a low rumbling sound. The ground trembled. Birds, or something like birds, flew up into the air with sharp cries. "An earthquake?" I asked. "Perhaps volcanic activity," said my uncle calmly. "We must move away from the river." We continued walking until the rumbling stopped. Then we rested and built a small fire using dry plants. The smoke rose slowly toward the glowing roof high above. Around the firelight, the forest seemed peaceful again. That night I could not sleep. I looked at the shadows of the giant plants and thought about our journey. We had gone so deep into the earth that I no longer knew where we were. Were we under the sea? Under another country? Would we ever find our way back? In the morning, my uncle decided to explore farther. "According to my calculations," he said, "we are close to the center of the earth itself. A few more miles and we may reach it." I didn't believe it, but I followed him. We walked for many hours through twisting tunnels and rocky passages. The temperature rose again. The rocks glowed faintly red. The air smelled of sulfur. Then we entered a huge cave full of shining stones. In the middle of it stood a tall wall of rock blocking our path. My uncle studied it and said, "We must go through this barrier. Behind it, I am sure, lies the next passage downward." He ordered Hans to set up his tools, a pickaxe and some gunpowder we had carried for emergencies. I was frightened, but there was no choice. Hans placed the powder carefully into a crack and made a long fuse. We moved back to a safe distance. "Ready?" said my uncle. Hans lit the fuse. It hissed and sparkled, then disappeared into the darkness. A few seconds later, a thunderous explosion shook the cavern. Rocks fell, and a wave of hot air hit us. When the smoke cleared, we saw a new opening in the wall, a tunnel going down steeply. My uncle clapped his hands. Success! Forward! We entered the new passage. At first it was narrow, but soon it widened into a deep shaft. A strong wind blew from below, as if the earth was breathing. Suddenly I heard a strange sound, a roar, deep and powerful, like the sea. "Uncle!" I shouted. "Listen!" Before he could answer, the ground beneath us began to move. A rush of water came from the darkness and lifted us off our feet. "A flood!" cried my uncle. "Hold on to the rocks!" The water rose quickly, swirling around us. Hans caught my arm and pulled me toward a large piece of rock. We climbed onto it just as the current grew stronger. The water carried us forward like a river through a tunnel. We were trapped in the dark, moving faster and faster. We held on with all our strength. The roar of the water filled our ears. It felt like hours, though it may have been only minutes. The heat increased. The air smelled of smoke and fire. I realized we were inside an active volcano, and we were being pushed upward by the rising water and steam. "An eruption!" shouted my uncle. "The explosion opened a path. We are being carried upward." The current became violent. The rock spun around. I could barely breathe. Hot steam burned my face. I thought we would die. Then, suddenly, a bright light appeared above us, a circle of dazzling red and gold. With a final roar, the water shot us out like arrows into open air. For a moment, I saw the sky. Real sky. Blue and full of sunlight. Then we fell onto soft sand. The water splashed around us and disappeared back into the sea. I lay there, weak and dizzy. My uncle laughed with joy. "We are alive! We are back on the surface!" I looked around. We were on the side of a mountain, surrounded by warm air and palm trees. The sea sparkled nearby. I couldn't believe my eyes. "Where are we?" I asked. Hans pointed to a small village below. My uncle spoke to a man who passed by and returned smiling. "Axel, we are in Italy, on the island of Stromboli. The volcano has thrown us out of the earth itself." I couldn't help but laugh. It sounded impossible, but it was true. The journey that began in Iceland had ended here, hundreds of miles away. We rested for many days in Stromboli. The villagers cared for us kindly. When we were strong again, we took a ship back to Germany. Everywhere we went, people asked about our adventure, but few believed it. My uncle published his notes and maps, and soon scientists from all over the world came to study them. As for me, I was happy to be home. Sometimes, late at night, I thought about that hidden world under our feet.
the silent sea, the prehistoric forest, and the great creatures in the dark water. It seemed like a dream, yet I knew it was real. One evening, as the sun set over Hamburg, my uncle said quietly, "Axel, the center of the earth remains a mystery. But remember, the greatest discoveries are not always about what we find, but about the courage to search." I smiled. He was right. We had seen wonders that no one else had ever seen. We had faced fear, darkness, and fire, and had returned to tell the story. And though I never again wished to travel deep into the earth, a part of me would always remember that incredible journey. A journey to the center of the earth.